In the darkness of cell block C, where the air was thick with regret and desperation, there was one woman who held on to something far stronger than the concrete walls that surrounded her: love. Elena Greer, a former medical assistant who had been imprisoned for a crime of passion, had spent 3 long years behind bars. She had lived her days in monotony, awaiting parole. That was, until she met Ethan Hale, the young prison guard who ignited something within her that she thought was lost. Ethan wasn't like the others. He was gentle, kind, and never treated her like a convict. Over the months, they had exchanged more than casual words. Their stolen glances turned into whispered conversations during night patrol, and eventually into something deeper, something dangerous. He didn't just listen to her stories of injustice. He believed her. In the dim light of the prison corridors, Ethan saw not just a woman accused of murder, but a soul he couldn't let go. She had been wronged, framed for a crime she didn't commit, and the thought of her languishing in prison while he lived a free life became unbearable for him. One evening, after Ethan had learned the truth about Elena's case from the court records he secretly accessed, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He couldn't allow her to rot behind bars for a crime she didn't commit. The corruption of the system that had entrapped her was more than Ethan could bear. It was time to act. Together. That night, the prison was unusually quiet, the guards rotating lazily, unaware of what was about to unfold. Ethan had been planning this for weeks, using his knowledge of the security system and trust he had gained from his fellow guards. He had memorized the surveillance blind spots, secured keys to critical doors, and more importantly, he had convinced Elena to trust him, to risk everything for freedom. "Are you sure about this?" Elena whispered from the shadows of her cell, her heart racing not just from the danger, but from the hope Ethan had given her. Ethan nodded, his face set with determination. "I'm sure. I can't leave you here. We do this now or we never do it. Trust me." She did. Against every instinct that screamed at her about the consequences, Elena believed in Ethan. The plan was simple but perilous. They would wait for the power outage, a scheduled blackout that lasted for 3 minutes every week for maintenance. During that time, Ethan would unlock her cell, lead her through the service tunnels, and they would slip out unnoticed. Once outside, a car would be waiting. Freedom was only moments away, if everything went as planned. As the lights flickered and then went out, Ethan moved quickly. The cold metal of the key slid into the lock of Elena's cell, and with a soft click, the door creaked open. "Now," he whispered, grabbing her hand. They moved swiftly, their footsteps light on the cold concrete floor. Every sound felt amplified, every breath too loud. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of what they were doing. They were so close. The service tunnel was damp and smelled of rust, but it was their only way out. Ethan led her through the maze of pipes and narrow corridors until they reached the final gate, which opened to the outside world. He had timed it perfectly. The guards would be making their usual rounds at the front of the prison, oblivious to their escape. The cool night air hit Elena's face like a shock. For the first time in years, she felt the wind that wasn't filtered through bars. She turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We made it," she breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan smiled, a brief moment of triumph before the reality of their situation set in. "Not yet. We still need to get to the car." But as they began to move, a shout rang out from behind them. A guard had noticed the open gate. They had seconds before the alarm would sound. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed Elena's hand and they ran, their footsteps pounding against the ground as the prison erupted into chaos behind them. The car was parked just beyond the tree line, and as they reached it, Ethan fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Elena glanced back at the prison, its towering walls now a silhouette against the night sky, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in something more than survival. The engine roared to life, and they sped away into the darkness, leaving the prison and their old lives behind. As the distant sound of sirens faded, Elena turned to Ethan, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They didn't know what the future held. They didn't know if they could outrun the law forever, or if their love could survive the consequences of what they had done. But for now, in this moment, they were free. And that was all that mattered. For love, they had risked everything. The night stretched out before them like an endless ribbon of possibility. They drove in silence at first, the weight of what they had done still settling in. Elena kept glancing at Ethan, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. What they had shared within the prison walls now seemed fragile in the real world. She wondered if he had thought this through, or if love had blinded them both to the enormity of their situation. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice breaking the stillness of the car. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "A safe house. It's not much, but we'll be off the grid for a while. Just until we figure out the next step." Elena nodded, staring out the window at the dark countryside rushing past. She had no family left, no one to turn to for help. In a way, that made it easier. There was nothing tying her to the life she had before, except Ethan. The headlights carved a path through the woods as they turned down a dirt road. They reached a small cabin tucked away in the trees, far from prying eyes. Ethan killed the engine, and for a moment, they sat there in the quiet, the tension between them hanging heavy in the air. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "We'll talk in the morning." Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable, its worn furniture and dusty shelves a reminder that it hadn't been lived in for some time. Elena moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the faint outline of the road they had traveled. Felt surreal. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan came up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Not if we're careful. I know the people chasing us. They're not as smart as they think they are. But we can't stay here long." Elena leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady reassurance of his presence. "Why did you do it, Ethan? Why risk everything for me?" He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Because I couldn't let you waste away in that place. You didn't deserve any of it, Elena. I knew it from the moment I met you. And because I love you." The words hung between them, and Elena felt the weight of them settle deep in her chest. She had been trying to protect herself from this, from feeling too much, because she knew how quickly it could all fall apart. But hearing Ethan say it, knowing he had thrown his entire life away for her, made it impossible to deny what she felt too. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I love you too," she whispered, and for the first time, she let herself believe it. They kissed, slowly at first, their lips hesitant as if testing the truth of their emotions. But then the floodgates opened, and the passion they had suppressed for so long rushed out, overwhelming them both. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the future, just the two of them in the dim light of the cabin. But as dawn began to creep over the horizon, the reality of their situation reasserted itself. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The authorities would come for them, and when they did, their love would be put to the ultimate test. The next morning, Ethan sat at the table, a map spread out before him. "We need to keep moving. We'll head toward the border, maybe find a way out of the country." Elena sat across from him, sipping a cup of coffee, her mind racing. "And then what? We live our lives on the run, always looking over our shoulders." Ethan's face hardened. "If that's what it takes to keep you free, then yes." Elena reached across the table, taking his hand. "I don't want to run forever, Ethan. I want to be free, really free. Not just from prison, but from all of this." His eyes softened. "Then what do you want to do?" Elena thought about it for a long moment. She could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on her. "We need to clear my name," she said firmly. "It's the only way we can have a life together. I can't keep hiding in the shadows. But we need to find proof, something that will expose the truth about what happened." Ethan leaned back, considering her words. "The system's corrupt, Elena. They won't just let you walk away, even if we find proof. We have to try," she insisted. "We have to believe there's a way out of this." Ethan studied her, the determination in her eyes, the strength she had shown in the face of everything. He realized then that he would follow her anywhere, risk anything to give her the life she deserved. "All right," he agreed quietly. "We'll find a way." But as they packed up the cabin and prepared to hit the road again, neither of them could shake the feeling that their time was running out. The law was closing in, and soon they would be forced to make the hardest decision of all, whether to fight for justice or to flee for good. They had escaped the prison, but they weren't free yet. Not by a long shot. Elena and Ethan drove through the winding back roads, every mile taking them farther from the cabin and deeper into uncertainty. The landscape blurred into a patchwork of fields and forests, but neither spoke. They knew the gravity of their situation. This wasn't just about staying ahead of the law anymore. It was about survival. The plan was simple. They would go back to the source, find the evidence that could clear Elena's name, and expose the corruption that had put her behind bars. But it was a dangerous gamble. The people who had framed her wouldn't just let them walk away unscathed. As the car approached the outskirts of a small town where an old associate of Ethan's worked, he pulled into a gas station. "We're almost there," he said, his voice calm but laced with tension. "This guy, James, he's the best at digging up dirt. He can help us get what we need." Elena nodded, her thoughts distant. She was grateful for Ethan's determination, but doubt gnawed at her. Could they really expose the truth without being caught themselves? As they pulled up to the shabby diner where James was waiting, Ethan gave her a reassuring look. "Stay here. I'll talk to him. If anything seems off, drive." Elena watched him disappear into the diner, her heart racing. She knew what was at stake for both of them, but the fear of being caught, of their love crumbling under the weight of their choices, hung over her like a shadow. Minutes passed, then 20, and Elena's anxiety grew. Suddenly, the diner door flew open, and Ethan rushed out, his face pale. He jumped into the car, his voice urgent. "We've got to go. Now." "What happened?" Elena asked, gripping the steering wheel. "James tipped me off. Someone's been following us. They know we're here." Panic shot through her. Without another word, she hit the gas, the car roaring down the road as fast as it could go. Behind them, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, gaining on them quickly. "They're getting closer," Elena shouted. Ethan turned to her, his expression fierce. "There's only one way out of this, Elena. We have to expose them. If we don't, they'll hunt us down forever." Elena swerved down a side road, her mind racing. They had to make it to the safe house where Ethan's contact had stashed the evidence. A flash drive containing documents that proved who had framed Elena and why. It was their only shot at clearing her name and getting out alive. The SUV was right on their tail now, its headlights flashing ominously. Elena pushed the car to its limits, navigating the sharp turns with a skill born of desperation. "We're not going to make it," she cried, fear clawing at her chest. "We will," Ethan said, his hand gripping her arm. "Just keep driving." Up ahead, the old warehouse where the evidence was hidden loomed out of the darkness. Elena skidded to a stop just outside, both of them scrambling from the car as the SUV roared closer. "They're right behind us," Elena gasped as they ran toward the side door of the building. Ethan pulled it open, shoving her inside before slamming it shut behind them. "Go. I'll get the flash drive. You hide." But Elena couldn't hide. Not anymore. She followed him into the dimly lit warehouse, her heart pounding in her ears. Ethan grabbed the hidden flash drive from a loose brick in the wall, but as he turned back toward her, the sound of footsteps echoed through the building. "They're here," he whispered. Suddenly, the door burst open, and two men, guns drawn, entered the warehouse. Elena's blood ran cold. They were trapped. "Give us the drive," one of the men snarled, aiming his gun directly at Ethan. Ethan held it out in front of him, slowly backing up. "You can have it. Just let her go." "No!" Elena screamed, stepping in front of Ethan. "I'm not running anymore. If you kill us, you'll never get away with it. The truth is already out there. People will know what you did." The men laughed, but their confidence faltered. "Hand it over. Now." Ethan met Elena's eyes. He wasn't going to let them win. With a sudden move, he threw the flash drive across the room, shattering it against the concrete floor. The men lunged toward it, but it was too late. Ethan grabbed Elena's hand. "Run!" They bolted for the back exit, hearing shouts and gunfire behind them. The warehouse door flew open, and they tumbled out into the night, sprinting toward the car. As they sped away, the SUV tried to follow, but its engine sputtered and died. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, they were miles away, their pursuers lost in the dust. "We did it," Elena whispered, her body trembling with exhaustion. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes softening. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got enough to bring them down." Days later, a package containing everything they had uncovered made its way to a prominent journalist, the kind who would stop at nothing to expose corruption. And soon, the story broke. A conspiracy that led to Elena's wrongful conviction, orchestrated by powerful figures who had underestimated how far love would go. Ethan and Elena didn't wait for the fallout. They disappeared, slipping away before the authorities could close in on them again. But this time they were free, not just from the law, but from the lies that had once imprisoned them. Somewhere far from the lives they had known, they built a new one. It wasn't perfect, and they were always careful, always looking over their shoulders. But they had each other, and that was all they needed. For love, they had risked everything, and together they had won.